G'day and thanks for joining us for another Australia Talks. I'm DK and I'm joined as always by my lovely co-host Ardeet. Today is Thursday, the 14th of May, 2026, and our topics this week are the budget. And our second topic is the budget again. There is a lot to talk about this budget. Of course, we still have our Two Ticks Town talk in the middle, and then we're going to jump into This Week in Australian History, and we'll finish off, as always, with the 4X Bottle Top Trivia, and this week's Bottle Top Trivia is budget-themed, or financial themed, I should say. But, as always, before we get into all of that, we need a little favour from you. If you enjoy the show, the best thing you can do to help us out is share it with a friend, and would also be grateful for an honest review as well. This helps us grow the podcast, and of course you get someone to talk about it too as well. So on that, let's catch up on the last week. Ardeet, hello, how has your week gone?
Oh, been a pretty good week. I got the veggie beds finally cleared out yesterday. I'd been a bit behind, and then with the hernia op, had to leave them for a bit. So they're ready for some autumn, winter planting. So it's the first bit of concentrated, like harder outdoor work I've done since the op, and so no ill effects, which has been positive. And hopefully I will be planting my garlic tomorrow. Also got an enormous amount of passion fruit. I had planted 2 passion fruit vines. A few years ago, let's say 4 years ago, and they went okay. Got a couple off there, so I thought, I sort of seem to recall passion fruit being a little bit more prolific. I thought I'll get another couple that were I think they might have been from diggers or recommended, and I think mates of the podcast might recall me talking about this, but if not, as a refresher, when I planted them with a piece of liver under them, which is apparently an old trick. They have just been part of what I did yesterday was cut back probably about a third of the 2 of them, because they were just growing onto the fruit trees and everywhere, and I got masses of passion fruit. Most of them, basically the ones that all just sort of fallen, were still there. And I probably picked. What my estimate would be, I would have had to have got 100 passion fruit.
Oh wow!
Yeah, they just it was just prolific. So I was able to had someone here doing something. So, do you like passion fruit? Yeah. Well, here you go. And then gave some to the next door neighbour as well, which I do particularly like doing, because she makes an absolutely delicious passion fruit tart. So if I give her something like that, or give her limes, because she makes a nice lime tart as well, she always sort of gives me a piece over the fence as a bit of a thank you. So hopefully she'll be making a passion fruit tart. Look, I don't expect it, but when I've had it, I thought, it's proper. It's the sort of got the country style cooking. It's all the proper ingredients, and it smells good, looks good, tastes good. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. The other thing, and I just noted it down here, went and saw a movie called Project Hail Mary.
Yes,
I had read the book, and then Mrs. Ardeet had said, there's this, because I haven't been, I hardly go to the movies at all, because most of the time I look and I think, and she said, there's this one. She said, I thought that you might be interested in that. And I said, I didn't even know it was a movie coming out. It shows how much attention I pay, because apparently it's been out and promoted.
Yeah, it's been promoted a lot. Yeah.
Well, there you go. So, yeah, welcome to my world where I'm totally oblivious to a lot of these things. And I had read the book and really enjoyed it. It was such a good movie. It was a great movie-going experience. It was one of those ones that, you don't have to see it on the big screen, but it worked really well on the big screen. It was a great adaptation of the book, and it was done as an enjoyable story with there's no sort of kitschy Hollywood stuff. There was no sort of things added in to try and appeal. There was no unnecessary, like no ridiculous tension, because there's plenty of tension and suspense just by the natural story. There's none of those things that you all sort of feel there's the hooks. The music was good. It was appropriate. It wasn't all this stuff that you sort of think, oh, this is deliberately crafted to evoke these emotions. I mean, obviously you pick music to create emotions in the person watching the film, but it didn't feel manipulative, and it was probably the best movie experience I've had for a couple of years. So if it's your thing...
Seal of approval.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So, yeah, if you're half thinking about it, or if you're like me, a cynical old bastard thinking there's nothing good on the movies anymore, if you're half interested, I reckon it's worth a watch. So,
okay.
Yeah, so that's been my week. What about you? What do you know about Project Hail Mary? You obviously...
I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it yet, and I haven't read the book. But it is kind of up my alley. I do like sci-fi and stuff like that. So I might go. I probably now won't, because I don't know how much longer it's in cinemas. And also, like, I hardly ever get to see a film in cinema. So the nature of the beast with young kids.
Sure.
So I probably won't see it in the cinemas. But I love a home cinema experience. So once it comes out onto streaming, I'll definitely watch it. And hey, the snacks are much cheaper in my living room, and the beer is ice cold, and I can get as many refills as I want. So
and you can pause it when you need to go for a pee.
Yes, and again, with kids, there is quite often a lot of pausing. A 2-hour movie becomes a 6-hour affair, but it's still enjoyable, you know. So actually, late Friday nights was normally when we watch our horror movies and adult movies and stuff like that, because the kids are sort of in bed. I'll have to go and actually watch it. I have heard really good things, so I'll have to actually make an effort to go and see it. My week this week was pretty boring. We've had on and off rain all week. Again, these nuisance showers, as I'm beginning to call them, just getting everything wet and then they bugger off, which is quite frustrating. But I was in Bunnings this week, and I always kind of enjoy having a walk around the garden section of Bunnings, particularly to see what fruit trees were coming in, especially this time of year, because you kind of get this weird eclectic mix of the seasons are sort of changing, and they're changing stock, and you never really know what they're going to have. And whilst I absolutely love the local garden centres and would encourage everyone to go and support them as well, your local small businesses, it can't help but you know, when you're in Bunnings, having a walk around. And this week I found, and I've been looking for, a new variety of avocado that is grown and cultivated here in Queensland, I believe. I'm not exactly sure the varieties that they've sort of interbred. But I will give a little bit of a shout out to, it's called hang on, I better get this right. It is called the Jala, Jala avocado, and it's absolutely huge. So I haven't actually tried one, but I believe, and they're quite hard to get your hands on, and I probably should zip back up to Bunnings now that I'm thinking about it and actually go and buy one of these trees, because I know that they're quite difficult to get your hands on. But they taste like a Hass avocado, which is a pretty typical avocado around the world. Very delicious. When most people think of an avocado, that's probably the variety they think of. But they are significantly larger. They're about 4 times the size of a Hass.
Wow.
Avocado. They can be up to 1 kilo in weight. Absolutely.
Bloody hell, that's a big avocado.
They are huge, bigger than most people when they put the two hands together, bigger than that. I think on average they're about 15 to 20 centimeters in length. They're quite green compared to the Hass, which kind of go sort of that purpley color. Yeah. But absolutely amazing in taste. I haven't personally tasted one yet, but I do know a couple of friends who put me onto these to keep an eye out for these. And they assured me that they taste absolutely fantastic. And so I've been very much looking for one. The problem and the reason I didn't buy it was because right now I don't have a great place to put it in the ground, and I don't really want to keep it in a pot or anything for the next sort of 12 months while I am rearranging the garden. So I've gone without, but I did see them in the local Bunnings. So if Bunnings have them in stock locally, I do believe they were cultivated, I think, on the Sunshine Coast. So it may just be that we got sort of lucky in the area. But if you are interested, look for Jala avocados, and hopefully this becomes the worldwide, the global default avocado, because they're freaking huge and they do look
a monster.
Absolutely amazing. So I was so excited to see it in the local Bunnings, but yeah, look. Watch this space. I'm definitely going to buy one and plant it. Most of these things, they do take a couple of years to fully grow and properly fruit. But so hopefully in a couple of years' time, we will be talking, and I will be telling you how I am drowning in my huge avocados that are the size of my head.
I've just looked up a picture.
Yeah, they're absolutely massive.
They're massive.
Yep. So shout out to the Jala avocado, and if you are interested, Google it, have a look, see if you can get one locally. I do know they're still quite new. They were only cultivated like on a commercial scale, I think about 2 or 3 years ago. So they are still very, very new.
Right.
I'm very, very keen to get one. And like I said, I couldn't believe that I found them in the local Bunnings.
Problem is the seed's about 90% the size of it.
No, they're not. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. Yeah. It's not that bad. Because that was my first thought. Is the seed absolutely huge? But thankfully not. They sort of have the seed to flesh ratio very similar to a Hass. It's just bigger, which is amazing. Yeah. That's what's amazing. So,
fill us in it's going to be 12 months or whatever. Be interested to hear that.
Yeah, I'm so excited to try one. I really, really. Look, if you're listening to this and you have some, reach out, australiatalks@proton.me. We'll organize a way that you can get me one so I can try one. Send me some guac or something like that. So. All right, let's kick off the budget. Dun, dun, dun. Tuesday's federal budget includes an overhaul of the rules for negative gearing and capital gains tax in what Treasurer Jim Chalmers is calling the biggest tax shakeup in 25 years. Basically all to help the housing crisis, or at least that is the justification. We're going to have to spend this episode going through some of the big ticket items, but we're going to kick it off with the elephant in the room. The two big changes were to capital gains tax and negative gearing. So let's just start fresh. I'm going to imagine you don't know what capital gains tax is. So capital gains tax is paid when you sell an asset, such as a property or a share. It is paid on the gain in value between when you bought it and when you sell it, aka the profit or the capital gain. You pay this as part of your regular income taxes, but there is a discount. Asterisk, because this is changing, obviously. Under existing pre-budget rules, the discount is 50%. That means that half of the gain is untaxed and the rest gets added to your other income, and that is taxed at your marginal tax rate. If the asset is your own home, though, it is totally exempt, and that hasn't changed. So before everyone freaks out, that hasn't changed yet. Let's not say it won't happen in the future, but I do feel like that probably won't occur in the future.
They'd break their promises on anything.
I mean, never say never. What about negative gearing? What is that? Thanks for asking, hypothetical listener. Negative gearing is used when the costs of a rental property, such as loan repayments, rates and upkeep, repairs, all of that kind of stuff, maintenance, those are higher than the rental income that you make. That is, that the property is being run at a loss. Those losses are tax deductible, meaning that they can be used to reduce the tax that you pay, not just on your rental properties or single property, but on all of your income. Because the tax you pay on all your income is not separate, the loss from your investment income can reduce your overall tax bill for the year. So why would you want to lose money on your rental property? Isn't it an investment? Yes, I mean, it is. And here's kind of the catch and the reason negative gearing kind of exists as a concept. The value from that property will continue to increase, so it is assumed, so that you're not investing for the investment income from the rent, you're investing for the capital gain in the future and using your tax dollars to kind of offset some of that cost. Of course, generally speaking, in the future, a lot of investment properties big start as negatively geared, and quite often they become positively geared over time as costs. Generally the biggest cost to the cost of running a rental property, if you think of it as a business, is the loan interest repayments. And of course, over time, those interest repayments go down, and generally that piece sort of decreases and so on and so forth. So, yeah. Of course, when paired with the 50% capital gains tax discount, this made rental property investments, particularly negative geared rental property investments, very popular. When the 50% capital gains tax discount was introduced in 1999, back before colour was invented, there was a spike in the number of rental properties that were negatively geared because, many investors have been able to profit by using negative gearing to reduce the tax they paid each year. They owned the property and then made back those losses when they sold those properties, pocketing much more of the capital gain thanks to the discount. So, what has changed? What has the budget done? Anybody who exchanges a property after 7:30 p.m. on budget night, which was Tuesday, so that clock, those gates have closed. So if you're listening to this thinking you'll take advantage of this, you won't. Those will not be able to use rental income losses to write down their ordinary wages income from July next year when the changes start. So there is currently a 1-year grace period. The losses can only be used to write down tax on other residential properties. So they're sort of splitting up how your taxable income is calculated in this respect. Or they can be carried forward to write down tax on residential property losses in future years, not your entire income as before. But there is a loophole. There's always a loophole. Investors in newly built homes will be able to continue to negatively gear those properties and use this to write down their overall tax income, basically as it currently exists, with a couple of little changes. A newly built home must be genuinely add to housing supply. So if you buy like an old shack, knock it down, rebuild it, that does not count unless the land is subdivided and multiple residences are added.
Oh, okay, right, okay. It's an interesting qualifier.
Yeah, so I think there were some people, and I did see this sort of talk online where they were like, "Oh, that's okay because we'll just knock down this old little shack and we'll build a new." That doesn't count. That's still an existing property. You of course can still invest in existing properties. You just don't get the benefits of the negative gearing off the income and so on and so forth. So it's not that property investors will disappear overnight. And of course, these changes are grandfathered in as well. So those that bought properties before 7:30 p.m. on budget night can continue to use the current negative gearing rules for as long as they own those properties. But as I sort of explained before, and from past analysis from the Grattan Institute, has suggested that most properties become positively geared after a few years anyway. So long-term grandfathering in the current market probably isn't going to be a huge issue. Probably. I think there's a lot of unintended consequences from some of these changes, which we'll get into in a little bit. But what about the changes to capital gains tax? What's going on there? So anyone that buys an investment property after 7:30 p.m. on budget night will get a discount that is equal to inflation over the time the asset is held, except for any time that falls before July 2027, during which gains will keep the 50% discount, which is a long way of saying there's still that 12-month grace period where we're grandfathering in that portion there. But once the capital gain is adjusted for inflation, it is then taxed as regular income, but subject to a 30% minimum tax rate. So this kind of closes some loopholes. That means that someone whose income is low enough to be under the tax-free threshold or in the 16% tax bracket will still have to pay 30% on capital gains at a minimum. So no gifting assets to your young children to sell perhaps, or to use their lower tax rate, or putting them into trusts and things like that. There is also an exemption for new builds. Those who buy newly built homes will be able to choose between the old 50% discount or the new inflation discount, including the 30% minimum, whichever is cheaper. I can't imagine that the 50% discount is never going to be cheaper, but the fact that there is a little bit of flexibility there for a few edge cases, I'm sure, is beneficial. There is different grandfathering rules on capital gains tax changes. For any property bought before 7:30 p.m. on budget night, any gains accrued up until next July will keep the 30% discount, except for any time that falls before July 2027, during which the gains will keep the 30% discount. But any future gains on the same property will be subject to new inflation discount and the 30% minimum. Is that clear as mud? If you own your own home, of course, it still remains exempt from capital gains tax. So there are no changes there. Don't panic. Don't try and sell everything. There's no fire sales in this economy. You can also convert your existing property into a rental property in the future and use negative gearing. However, the capital gains for that period that you use it as a rental in the future would be subject to new inflation regime. So this is where this starts getting really messy, and I would suggest to everybody, before you decide to do anything in this space, talk to your accountant and let them figure out all the new rules. Not tomorrow. Don't jump on the phone and call them right now, because there's probably a million other people doing that. Give them a month and then have that conversation about exactly how this is going to affect you and your personal circumstances. Of course, everything we're talking about here is not tax advice. We are just relaying what's happened.
Not tax advice, not financial advice. It's
absolutely
our own
not.
Personal opinion. Speak to your financial advisor or accountant. We're just two podcasters giving our 2 cents worth.
Exactly. Do not take financial advice from a podcast.
No.
But how is this going to affect the housing market is the big question. Treasury expects that over the course of the next decade, 75,000 homes will shift from the hands of investors to first home buyers. Treasury expects that the policies will overall reduce housing supply by 35,000 houses, which is not an insignificant amount of housing. But Labor's other investments in housing this budget, in theory, will add 65,000 new homes, more than offsetting what they expect to lose. Of course, we're expecting a net increase of 30,000 homes. Take all these figures with a grain of salt. And the budget expects that house price growth will be 2 percentage points slower than otherwise, and rents should increase by about $2 per week. Some high-profile economists say that the budget could be underestimating the hit to property prices, though. Economists at the National Australia Bank said in a statement, quote, "It is possible that the changes to taxation arrangements for houses are some of the most significant in a quarter of a century," end quote. They didn't seem to lay their cards on whether this is positive or negative, but Matthew Bowles, a senior associate at the Grattan Institute, said the government's forecasts were largely in line with the think tank's own, and that the changes would likely reduce house prices by about 1% in growth. So don't expect house prices really to go backwards. It's more that the growth will just slow down. He noted that the grandfathering of capital gains tax discount and negative gearing means that existing investors will retain most of their tax benefits. And of course, this will limit their economic impact moving forward. But economists have broadly agreed that the changes could reduce the rapid growth in house prices, which I think for a lot of people is probably a good thing. But as always, time will tell with how the market is going to react. Ardeet, I'm sure you have a lot of feelings about these changes. Big and bold is what's been thrown around a lot. Bold is certainly a word I would use, but I feel like there's going to be some fairly big unintended consequences with these changes. But let me throw it over to you. How do you feel about this? Is this going to affect you personally?
Now, do you want to, given we're doing in two parts, DK? Do you want me to give me a teaser for part two? And yeah, for mates of the podcast, DK and I really don't do a lot of scripting together. So
no, we don't.
Let's give you a little peek behind the curtains. What actually got in mind for part two?
So in part two, we are going to go through basically some of the big ticket items that were in the budget, including the Working Australians tax offset. We are going to be talking about sort of tax deductions, defence is getting a boost, fuel security, health, productivity.
All right, that gives me enough. Right, yeah. I see.
And a few other big ticket items. So we're that's more of a list, I guess. This one is we're sort of really knuckling down into these two big tickets, the big bold changes, if you like.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Look, I feel it's a highly political budget. Let me make a wild prediction off the right off the bat. This will be rife with unintended consequences over a period over several years that we'll look back on and say, well, what did you expect was going to happen? Look what you're incentivizing. You're in some ways pandering to what you think is going to get you votes, and that's frequently what happens. But this is probably probably the most significant budget in terms of fundamental changes to taxation, income, how the tax system and collection of it is structured for a number of years. I'm trying to think when the last one was that had such a package. And
I would say probably 2000 with the introduction of like capital gains tax discount. And
I think that's probably a fair call.
Yeah,
we certainly had, with the coup and everything that happened with the 2008 GFC and other hiccups and that along the way. We certainly had budgets that have come out to try and address things like that. But this is a fundamental structural change.
Yeah.
Look, and why should I be surprised that politicians are breaking promises? But these were two big ones. That they said, if you elect us, we're not going to touch capital gains and we're not going to touch negative gearing.
Yeah, they did say that.
Yeah, exactly. So you just said they did, didn't you?
Yeah, they did. They
Sorry,
specifically said that they wouldn't. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Now, if they said, well, we'll do our best, or one of these, piss weak pledges that often get made, you'd sort of think, oh, well, what do you expect? But this was something that was important to a lot of voters, and I think swung the opinion, swung the decisions of a lot of people thinking, well, if they're not going to touch that, so it's fraudulent in many ways. However, that's politics. That's how it goes. They do. They do lie. They do break promises. There's nothing particularly new there. I can be as
it's not unique to this government.
Exactly. But these were big promise breaks, like significant ones. I do find it interesting how many people are accepting this promise break because, oh, look, you had to do it because of this situation. And look, I'm not unaware of the fact that things can change, and you do have to say, look, this is a new situation we have to cope with. I don't think the situation had changed enough that this was required. And the other thing with it is when you hear these decades-long time frames, I think it's always a bit sus to me. It's one of these things of, well, we're putting this in, and then within 10 years or 20 years, we're going to save this amount of money. This is going to happen. It's always a flag. For me. On the two that you discussed, the capital gains tax, I've always hated the capital gains tax, and I've always hated it because I know the counter argument to what I'm about to say is, well, if you have a capital loss in some things, you can offset against your income. To which I think, well, how about we just don't have the tax at all? I always find it just so frustrating that you can make a decision to what's the example? Say you're a stamp collector. You think, oh, okay, I think that stamp might be the thing I'm really interested in. And if you happen to make a particularly good call, that the government comes along and says, oh, well done, I'll take a piece of that. That there's nothing they've done for it. There's other things that you can argue. Okay, you're paying stamp duty because we're looking after the properties in that area, we're providing these roads, we're providing these services to it. You can have an argument there. But when it's these things of, you've made a good decision, and they think, well, okay, we're entitled to that just because you've made money, it's always rankled me. Conversely, I don't think that people should be entitled to say, oh, I made a bad decision, so I should be able to claim that. It goes both ways for me. It's a real button push for me, and it has for ages, because it's that mafia OSA wanting to wet their beak just because they've spotted somebody who has made some money. Let's get a bit of a counter argument to that. I can understand the argument of if you're making money just because it's capital gains, why should you be entitled to a discount? Whilst I would have some arguments against it, I can understand that. So the solution, in inverted commas, that they've put in about inflation adjusted calculation, I can see some reason for that. So, if you've bought something for, X amount of dollars 10 years ago, my understanding of how it works, and jump in if I've got this wrong, but my understanding of how it works is saying, well, if it was worth this much 10 years ago, adjusting for inflation, it should be worth this much now. If it's worth more, that's what you pay tax on. If it's not worth more, then you don't have to pay that tax.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, good. I thought I had the basics of that right. I can see some reasoning for that. That if they just come out and they said, look, there's no, there's just straight tax on it. I think, but putting that in, I think, yeah, I can sort of see an argument for that, saying, look, with the inflation, what's been eaten away from it, we're just going to tax you on the bit that's left over. So, look, I probably prefer obviously I prefer none, but it's not that completely unreasonable to me. The negative gearing, I've never really loved the concept of negative gearing. I always thought, well, surely positive gearing would be better. However, I do understand the capital appreciation, the longer term thinking, the plans, how it helps offset income. I think that negative gearing one, to me, that's the big festering sore that is just going to be passing out unintended consequences all over the place I predict within 5 years. One of the things that unfortunately gets missed in these things is failing to acknowledge what incentivizes people. If you're going to make it difficult if you're going to remove a lot of the incentives to investing in rental properties, then to me it's quite a reasonable thing to say you're probably not going to get as many people interested in investing in rental properties, or those who are in it are going to look for ways to make up their lost income, because they're going to say, well, now I've got these issues for it. The only thing I can do is charge more to the consumer, the renter in this case. Now there'll be a mix between those two things. People who say, no, it's just too hard, it's not worth it, or I can't afford to get over that hump of paying the interest rates until it actually does become positively geared. Particularly when you've got people who have been able to get into that when they've been able to reduce their entire taxable income, so they can do their grind away at their job, pay off enough to sort of get them over the hump with that, and then start to move more towards a positive geared side. You sort of remove that, so you remove a number of people who have provided that for the market. This loophole that they got in there about new homes, sort of dangling that as a glittery thing, in terms of an exception, I can understand slipping that in. It's not a bad idea. It probably fits into the category of what I like to see of, you do have to start trying to do things differently, because what we've been doing has not worked particularly well in a lot of areas. So I can respect the concept and try. I don't think it's going to work. I suppose I just think I'll hold my tongue on that one, because I'd like to see what happens in the next couple of years, but you're still going to have to go through everything that's required to build a new home in order to start going down this process, and there's a lot of costs there with regard, as opposed to buying something existing and renting it out. Now, as always with these things, may well be wrong, and if I turn out to be wrong, I'll tell you next year or year after. I've got no qualms about doing that. I don't have a hell of a lot of confidence in this. And the other thing in there, before I chuck it over to you, DK, is this 30% minimum that comes in, and it's slipped in under the the big sparkling banner of this is fair. It's just the camel's nose under the tent. It's setting a precedent, a new evil precedent, in my opinion. It's just sort of a case of, okay, we can put that in. Because 30 is going to become 32, 35, 40. It's a lever that governments just will be unable to resist pulling, and once it's there as a precedent, they'll be able to say, "Oh, here's something else this is unfair because we've judged it this way. We better put that on there to make sure it's fair for everyone." And at the end of the day, the root of it's the fact the government wants to keep redistributing wealth for its own growth and survival. And to me, this is just an example of the beast getting bigger and even more voracious. So, what do you reckon? What do you think about the capital gains tax and the negative gearing, and overall about the structural changes, and just your general opinions?
I have a lot of thoughts. Trying to put these into succinct kind of 10 minutes is going to be difficult. But look, I think they did a bit like what you said. They did need to make a change. This is a pretty bold change, but I think it's done in a smart way, in that they're not going to blow up the economy by doing this. If they just came out and said, we're scrapping negative gearing, period, I think that would have that would have been bad. That would have been very, very bad. I do think negative gearing needed some sort of reform. And I think it's quite difficult to even kind of discuss this politically, because it is such a big part of the economy, which I think is bad. Genuinely, I don't think that's a great thing. So I think in a way, and I want to. There's a lot of asterisks on this, but I do think in a way this is quite smart by restructuring this to restrict negative gearing to new builds only. We know we have a massive housing supply issue, and if we can help get that supply up whilst also reducing housing investment, I think that's a good way to kind of attempt to reform this. So in that way, I don't think it's as bad as it could have been. Let's put it that way. The capital gains tax changes are where, much like yourself, I have the biggest problem. These are going to hurt everyone. This isn't just going to hurt property investors, which is where they've kind of angled this. We're going after property investors. And I think politically they're kind of angling this towards younger people, younger voters, to sort of go, we're investing in the future and all of this kind of stuff. What frustrates me is a lot of young Australians invest their home deposit money into the share market to kind of take advantage of the investment growth, that sort of share vehicle, to kind of boost up that nest egg that they've got growing. It's a lot better than just having it in a bank account. But with these changes, I feel like they're kind of unfairly penalizing them in that capital gain. Now it's kind of going to delay some people perhaps a bit of time. So I do think that's going to hurt young people as a bit of an unintended consequence to this. I'm not sure exactly how I would have reformed the capital gains tax exemption, other than basically just fully coming out. Capital gains tax exemption for investment properties is this change, and everything else is fine. That's probably what I would have gone with. That's not what they decided to do, and they've just gone across the board, which... like, I do understand that they don't want to necessarily carve out, and specifically go after property investors with a rabid teeth, but you kind of already are. So just do it the whole way and don't go after other investment vehicles as well. So there's a lot of frustration for me in that space. I do think, though, that broadly speaking, going after negative gearing in this way, which, again, you really have to put kid gloves on when you start talking about negative gearing, because there is so much money invested in this space. It affects so many people, from small retail, mum and dads that are just trying to get a leg up and they've got a single investment property, to people that this is their entire income, this is their job, they've got hundreds of investment properties, and this is how they do their business. So you've got this whole spectrum of people. Some people that are taking massive advantage of the tax situation and making significant amounts of money, to people that are just trying to get a leg up on everybody else, and they're very much part of the rat race. I think I probably wouldn't have gone after negative gearing in this way. If you ask me, I probably would have capped it at, say, like 2 properties and left it at that, and just said, if you're a companies, I'd probably go after in a different way. But I would have gone, say, you get two investment properties, you can negative gear it, and that's it. It's capped. No more. Doesn't matter if it's existing or if it's new, and just left it at that. And that way everyone can kind of invest. They can dabble. They can have a go, but they're not going to get kneecapped by, because of course you can still invest in property without negative gearing. But you just have to be smarter about it, and so on and so forth. And that's still true with these changes. I just think it's kind of kneecapped some younger Australians who were on the precipice of perhaps buying their first investment property, or are in the future looking to do that. And of course, tax laws change all the time, and in 10 years' time they may change again, or the next government may come in and change them, and so on and so forth. So nothing's ever set in stone, particularly when it comes to taxes. But I do think that these reforms, bold is a word I would use, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think they were the best way to go about this. In saying that, I do think broadly speaking, it is a good thing to try and direct Australians away from property investment and into more broader investment vehicles that will benefit the economy as a whole. I can't stress this enough. Housing is a non-productive asset. The houses don't make anything, right? A house, rental income is simply that. Houses are shelter. I don't think it's a great vehicle for investment, and I think we've built this beast, this monster in our economy that is going to be very hard to tame moving forward. A good example is somewhere like the United States, where, as far as I'm aware, they don't, and I'm happy to be wrong, but as far as I'm aware, they don't have a vehicle like negative gearing. And there are a lot of other countries in the world that don't have negative gearing at all. It's just not a thing. And as a result, we see a lot more investment in like the stock market, in private businesses. Those are productive, generally speaking, are productive assets. If I invest $500,000 into a business, whether that be a massive multinational or a small local company that's, I don't know, let's say they make toilets, right? That $500,000 investment is productive within the economy. It is employing people, they are making stuff, they are selling stuff, they are providing a service to the broader community, and perhaps, depending on where I invest it, on a global scale, right? If I put $500,000 into Apple stocks, I own $500,000 of that company, and they're using their money for business, and they're investing it and so on and so forth. If I invest $500,000 into a rental property, I'm basically parking my money in a way. It's almost like akin to buying gold, right, and putting it in a bank. It's a non-productive asset that is growing in value because of scarcity. Just like if I was to buy a diamond or something like that and put it in a bank vault. It's a non-productive asset. And so that's not good for the economy, because I'm taking that money, essentially I'm taking that money out of the broader economy and I'm parking it somewhere. And it's not doing anything for the broader economy. And that is a real shame. And I feel like that's kind of kneecapped Australia in a way. And I don't think this beast has quite come to full fruition yet. I think where this train is running down the tracks, and hopefully it doesn't fall off the cliff at the end, because if the property market in Australia, and this is why I say we have to put kid gloves on when we're talking about negative gearing, because the Australian property market is so huge, you can't talk about reforms without everybody freaking out.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. That's a huge issue because, again, this is a non-productive asset. This doesn't help the economy. The GDP figures for Australia do not include, broadly speaking, rental property investment. Like, it doesn't, compared to, let's say, if we instead of having that huge percentage of investment property investment into, say, Australian companies, the economic benefits would be ridiculous by contrast. So it is quite frustrating for me because I look at it and go, we've got a huge sector of the economy that is not pillars of sand, but as close as you can get to it without it being that. And at the same time, everybody is kind of part of the Ponzi scheme and no one wants it to go wonky. And I think that is a huge shame. And part of the reason that exists and we have grown this beast was negative gearing. So I think in a way, if you look at it through this lens, I think the government is quite clever to go, look, we're grandfathering it in, which I think is the right move. Regardless of how you feel about negative gearing, without destroying the economy, that is the only way you could do this, right? We're grandfathering it in. If you've got it, you can keep it. If you don't got it, then you can't have the same deal.
Yeah, it was a little sliver of morality in there.
Yes. So, which honestly, there was no alternative. That's what had to happen, right? And I think moving forward, going, look, we're only going to do it on new builds and it is with these specific circumstances and so on and so forth. It's kind of slowing this train down. It's not stopping it and it's not going to stop, but it is. And it wouldn't surprise me, it wouldn't surprise me if there were further reforms in the work further down the line, say in 5 years' time. Look, I'm sure this government probably has a plan. Whether or not they're going to be able to enact that, I don't know. The coalition has already come out and said, we hate this budget, we're fully against it, so on and so forth. And I'm sure other parties have voiced similar concerns. I do think, in a way, this is kind of a smart way to transition the Australian people away from thinking, when I grow up, I'm going to buy an investment property to get ahead, to when I grow up, I'm going to invest my money in the share market or I'm going to invest it in small business. I'm going to use other investment vehicles to get ahead rather than I'm going to buy as many houses as I can, because that's not working. We know that. Like you said, this isn't working. How do we make changes without the whole house of cards coming down? And I think in that, again, looking through that lens, I think the negative gearing changes are a smart way to restructure things. I do think the capital gains tax changes, though, kind of kneecap this framing by going, it doesn't matter if you invest elsewhere, you're still not going to have the same benefits. So that's where I kind of come unstuck going, if you just limited the capital gains tax changes to property investment, I think this would, broadly speaking, would have actually been a much, much better idea. And I think for the future, probably would be better. I think the Australian economy would be stronger fast forward 10 years if they did it that way around, because it encourages. It comes back to what you were saying about encouraging people to where to invest. Encourage them to invest in Australian companies. Encourage them to put their money into productive assets. Don't kneecap everybody with the same brush because you're trying to clean up this beast that was created 26 years ago. So I think broadly speaking, they're kind of heading in the right direction, which is very difficult. I hope I've kind of painted that picture for you. But at the same time, I think they've taken a misstep here with the capital gains tax changes. And at the end of the day, we're just going to have to stand back now and see how the market reacts and see what's going to happen. Because I do think there's going to be quite a few unintended consequences, and not all of those are going to be obvious straight away, as a lot of the times these things are, and we're going to have to wait and see and see what's going to happen moving forward. So this could backfire spectacularly. And actually, I think what will be a real shame as well is if this government loses the next election, whatever government comes in next basically undoes all of this. I don't think that would be necessarily a smart thing, because I think that could create a bigger beast and more unintended consequences. Sometimes you kind of just have to play the cards that have been dealt out and just kind of give them a little bit of time to mature. But that may be unpopular, but I do think this is probably, now that they've done this, we need to see how this goes over the next few years before we kind of decide to make some major changes, unless it's catastrophic and we need to pump the brakes. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think they've kind of sort of walked that tightrope for now. But I think we'll have to wait and see. Look, as I love to say, watch this space.
Okay, interesting perspective.
All right, let's move on. It is time for our Two Ticks Town Talk.
I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Across the desert, fair man. I've breathed the mountain air, man. I've traveled, I've had my share.
This week we're going to a town that I've been to a couple of times, but I've been to the area around it many times. So we're heading up to Cunnamulla in Queensland, just over the border of New South Wales. So it's a town and locality in the Shire of Paroo in southwestern Queensland, and it was established in 1868 following a town survey that year. So the post office opened then, as usually does when they get established, and it gets the name from a cattle station, Cunnamulla, spelt the same but with a H, which had been established in 1863 by Blake Samuel Smith, who took the name from a local Aboriginal word meaning a deep waterhole in the Warrego River. So settlement grew at the site because of that waterhole, and it was also where two major stock routes intersected. It developed in the late 19th century as a coach stop for Cobb & Co coaches, which we sort of forget how much Cobb & Co was a part of the Australian outback and just transport generally. That's funny. We sort of mentioned it. It pops in, but
and also I think it's worth remembering too that there was a few different companies that all kind of used the same Cobb and Co throughout the country. So, but yes, they were a huge deal and so important. I feel like we seem to forget how critical they were for a lot of the development out there.
Yeah, and particularly before the railway. So the railway line from Charleville up north reached Cunnamulla in 1898. So it's an admin centre nowadays for the Paroo Shire, which is the area up there. It's just shy of 50,000 square kilometres, 47,000. And it's on the Warrego River in the massive Murray-Darling Basin at the crossroads of the Matilda and Adventure highways. So Matilda Highway is comprised of three different highways and two different highways and a road, and Adventure Ways for a road going from Brisbane to, in the west, to Innaminka in South Australia. Population of 1,233, about 44% of the residents identify as Aboriginal and or Torres Strait, and the main industries are cattle, sheep and goat farming, tourism and opal mining as well. So I don't normally associate that. Well, it's within the vicinity, but it's not sort of what springs to mind when I think of opal mining.
No.
The town has become known as an emerging wellness destination because it's got therapeutic artesian waters. So they've got some nice hot springs up there. So the original inhabitants around that Cunnamulla area were the Kunja people, also known as Gunya or Kunja, and their traditional land encompasses the Paru Shire, and the Gudnya language is spoken by the Kunja people. First European explorer to pass through was a bloke called Edmund Kennedy in 1847. So the pastoralists arrived after, about 20 years after that, with the usual interactions between settlers and local Aboriginal people, including skirmishes. We may as well say most of the time. By the way, see note 1. Yes, there were skirmishes here as well.
Yep.
There's got the town itself. There's a big double the size of a person of the Cunnamulla fella statue. There was which is honouring the Aussie larrikin stockman, and there was a song written by a bloke called Stan Costa, but it was popularised by Slim Dusty. I'm a Cunnamulla fella, Cunnamulla kind of fella. If you haven't heard it, you can look it up.
No, come on, keep singing it. I want to hear the whole song.
Yeah, I can't remember. yeah, how to drive people away. So they had a number of major floods in 1990, 97, 2010 and 12. So they've built up an 11-metre levee to sort of protect those areas. Sorry, just lost my place there. In the neighbourhood of Cunnamulla, there's 2 sanctuaries I wanted to note. There's one called the Bowra Wildlife Sanctuary, lies on traditional Kunja lands, and the other one is the Currawinya National Park, and it's on Budjiti country. And that's great news if you're an avid bird watcher. So one of the things I sometimes find frustrating when I'm on a drive is when I get to an area that I think I'd like to explore on foot, but I'm surrounded by fenced properties on both sides of the road.
Yeah,
You travel up to you travel up to Cunnamulla, and you can see you see this. Oh, I'd love to get out and have a walk there, but it's someone's place, and you're traveling up that way, and you get that basically along the whole road. Because again, it's as we've talked about so often on here, a lot of those things are just massive properties, and the road's essentially just cutting them in half, or is the borderline for each of them. So they're not usually too happy about you jumping the fence and having a bit of a walkabout, but you'll often see plenty of signs that would actively dissuade you.
Yes.
Yeah. So those 2 sanctuaries are a great opportunity to get out and actually walk in the countryside you've driven through. So the Bowra Wildlife Sanctuary, that's about 16 kilometres northwest of Cunnamulla. Not massive, but 15,000 hectares. That's about 60 square miles in the Mulga lands bioregion. They brought that property and established it in 2010, managed by the Australian Wildlife Conservancy, which they do tend to do for a few properties, particularly up round there, just buy them and manage them and try to bring them back to a natural state. So since then, the boundary fences have been upgraded. They removed sheep and cattle. They put in feral animal control programs targeting foxes, goats, and pigs, using low intensity burns fire management to improve the vegetation diversity. And it's become a long-term arid zone bird study area. They've been operating, doing that since 2013. So it's one of the, look, I suppose if you're a bird watcher, you know about these things. If you're just a bit interested in it and wanting to go somewhere different, it's a premier destination for bird watchers. There's about 200 bird species. 9 of them are threatened. There's regular sightings of the pink cockatoo, which breeds in hollows in the trees and the properties, Burke's parrot, and the blue-winged parrot, 3 species of Australian babbler, and the spotted bowerbird. Always like seeing a bowerbird's nest in the wild too. Plus, as you'd expect out there, the usual species of reptiles, mammals, and amphibians, swamp oddities, earless dragons. So you can go up there into that sanctuary from May to September, and there's a bit of bush camping available if you book online. As per usual, details are all in the show notes. So whenever you get one of these things, and look, if there's any information that we mention and we skipped in the show notes, always give us a yell. We're always happy to give you a bit of extra info. Or if I've simply forgotten to put it in. The other one, Currawinga National Park. That lies about 170 kilometres southwest of Cunnamulla. And yes, that is in the neighbourhood up
that's
there.
just up the road, right?
Yeah, well, it is. The place we used to hunt at, Glentucky, which is why I was familiar with this area. It's about, I think it's about 130 k's south of Cunnamulla. And that was, if you had to essentially go up to the shops or do your shopping, it was a bit of a trip up to, nick up the road to Cunnamulla. So, it's a different perspective out there. But Currawinga's a bit bigger. It's about 344,000 hectares, so 1,330 square miles. And it's one of Queensland's largest national parks. So as well as all the wildlife, it's also got... there's a whole lot of Aboriginal cultural heritage up there, and a mix of 19th and 20th century pastoral history, old buildings, relics of old buildings and equipment. It's got a couple of major lakes in there, a saltwater lake or saline, and Lake Waiara and Lake Namulla, which is fresh water. And that creates this real interesting inland habitat for water birds. There's also a whole lot of artesian springs, and it's one of those areas that's got you've got the red sand plains, you've got the mulga scrubs, mesas, and rocky ranges. So and rocky ranges. It's just that classic. Countryside there, which is why I was saying it's a good opportunity to get out there and have a look. And they've got also rare plant and animal species as well. They've got 200 bird species there too. Most of them from because of the lake are water birds and migratory shore birds, and they're doing the same thing. They've got a predator-proof fences around the place. One in particular, they've got a 25 square kilometre predator-proof fence that encloses the population of greater bilbies. They can't go there into the public. I think we've mentioned that.
I think we've mentioned that before.
Yeah, it might have been one of the topics that we got, but that's where those bilbies are. And in this one in particular, it's four-wheel drive only. Access to the lakes. It's remote, so look, you have to be fully self-sufficient. You're not going to be able to turn up there, turn on a tap and have a shower and make a cuppa. What you need, you have to be carrying in with you.
Yeah, and on that, I do think if you're coming this far west without a four-wheel drive, it's probably not a great idea. I think it's a good. You can do it if you're staying on paved roads, obviously, but I do think if you want to explore this area, you really should be in a 4x4. Yeah,
exactly, and just have a basic skill set. But look, with these ones, you'll have a certain amount that you can go to and have at least go off the road and have a sticky beak. But you want to do anything serious, you've got to be prepared for it. So as the main reason I'm familiar with this is I used to hunt with some mates they're up at Glentucky, and it's also part of the reason I love the countryside. I mean, that was one of the sometimes I'd just say, look, you drive back to camp, I'm going to walk across a salt plain or a nice big open a bit of red dirt. Just look, I'm particularly biased towards this. On one trip, the owner of the property we're on, Glentucky, took us to see the remains of cattle yards from the middle 1800s. It was put there by a bloke who I'd never heard of, James Tyson. So the owner filled us in on a couple of details about the man. So I'll expand on what I was told and share some of the details with mates of the podcast. James Tyson is considered to be Australia's first self-made millionaire. He was born in New South Wales near Narellan in 1819. And third son of William Tyson and Isabella Tyson, nee Colson. His mum had been transported as a convict for theft, arriving with his father and eldest brother in 1809. So he used to do work as a farmhand around the early 1830s. Did a bit of period apprentice as a bootmaker, and then later worked as a pastoral labourer. And he and his brothers, they ended up taking up squatting licences in Western New South Wales, where basically at that time, if you were prepared to go out there, fence it off, go through the bit of paperwork, make the claim, you could take the land. Obviously with all that entails in the comment of getting out there and taking the land. So he'd settled on land at the junction of Lachlan and Murrumbidgee rivers down there in New South Wales. So his fortune began in the Bendigo goldfields, but not with the gold, as we might have imagined. He and his brother William, they arrived there in 1852 with a small mob of cattle. They established a slaughter yard and a butcher's shop, and then within 3 years built a business that sold late in 1855 for an estimated £80,000, which roughly translates into an absolute shirtload back in those days. So they used those proceeds and bought 3 sheep stations in the Deniliquin area, and they improved them with fencing and earth tanks. His brother John died, and Tyson consolidated his holdings, sold most of his Deniliquin properties, and went back to Lachlan to further aggregate pastoral leasehold land. So by the time of his death, he controlled 5,329,000 acres, so 2.1 million hectares was under his control, and about 352,000 that were freehold. So he had stations stretching from New South Wales through Victoria and into Queensland. And getting back to the area that we're at, next to Glentucky, there was a cattle station called Cunnamulla. So he purchased that and a whole lot of other properties on the Warrego River. And rather than just sort of getting into the breeding, he bred and fattened stock for metropolitan markets. So he created this supply chain that delivered beef to Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane. So he tried to be sort of practical and experimental with his land management. He'd dig channels for water distribution. He supported infrastructure projects such as rail links, where they served his interests, and where they didn't, he didn't support them quite as much. He was a member of the Queensland Legislative Council, and he acted as a magistrate on benches in both New South Wales and Queensland. So back then, his estate was realised at approximately £2 million. That was one of the largest in Australia at the time. Again, he died intestate, so there's a whole lot of argy-bargy amongst his kin till it was divided up after a whole lot of prolonged court proceedings. So yeah, just if you haven't got a will, it makes life easier for people left behind. So it's not hard to do, just a bit of a visit with a solicitor and you can at least get a basic one done up. It does make life easy for people. But anyway, he did what he did.
Very much so.
Yeah, it is very much so. There's a couple of quirky aspects of his character that made him a bit of a legend in his own lifetime. He was renowned for extreme frugality. Was never known to drink, smoke, or swear. He dressed plainly like a tradesman or a boundary rider, and he frequently visited his properties incognito. He'd stay in swagman's camps rather than managers' homesteads, just to sort of check out what was going on and get an actual realistic picture rather than, the bosses in town. We've got to, spruce things up. So the contemporary newspapers dubbed him Hungry Tyson, and Banjo Patterson actually immortalised him in a poem called Tyson. So I've put a link for the poem in the show notes if you want to look at it. But one of the verses in the reference that references this behaviour was when a plain-looking Tyson comes into town to cash a cheque in the combined bank and pub, because they would often do that. So a long grey stranger, eagle-eyed. Know me? Of course you do. It's not my work, the boss replied, to know such tramps as you. Well, look here, mister, don't be flash, replied the stranger then. I never care to make a splash. I'm simple, but I've got the cash. I'm Tyson. So the poem's a lot longer, but yeah, it was just interesting that he'd do that thing of just going there, keep it low key, no fuss, but he was just this steady worker. So he was unmarried, childless. He was ailed for 2 weeks before he died on 4th of December 1898, refusing medical attention to the end, and his remains ended up in the family vault in Campbelltown in New South Wales. Well, I remember we were sitting around the campfire one night with the owner of the property up there, and he told us a story he'd been told about Tyson. And apparently Tyson was sitting at the fire with some of the station hands. One of them pulled out a smoke and then lit it with a match. And Tyson was reputedly so horrified that the hand had used a match when there was a fire full of burning sticks that he either sacked the bloke or docked his pay for being so wasteful. So next time you're up in Cunnamulla, have a bit of a drive and walk at the Sanctuary and National Parks, then head back into town for a relax in the hot springs and maybe grab a pub meal. But if you're within cooey of a campfire and want to light a romantic candle to finish the night, remember to grab a stick out of the fire rather than use a match. Otherwise, you may risk the wrath of the ghost of James Tyson up there in this week's Tooting's Town Talk of Cunnamulla in Queensland.
That's good. Though I would have to say I have been sitting around a campfire and someone went to light a cigarette and got out. Has anyone got a lighter? And I was like, what? What? So a man of my own heart, I do feel the same way. But, hey, mate,
Yeah.
Get a bloody
Where do you
twig.
think we are?
Hello. So, yeah, nah. Maybe I'm the ghost of Tyson. It's... how interesting. I think we always kind of forget, like, I know this sounds silly when you say it out loud, but history is so full of interesting people that live such interesting lives, and the stories they could tell if only, they were still around. But he sounds like he lived such an incredible life, and to basically not have anyone to pass all that onto, it seems such a shame, I wonder why. He obviously worked too hard that he didn't really care about a legacy, but in some ways that's the sort of person you want to have a legacy, don't you? So
yeah, exactly. Pass on. It's obviously with sort of a couple of brothers. There was I'm assuming nephews and nieces and in-laws and things. But yeah, I suppose people make the decisions they make. I certainly didn't see anything that elaborated on his private life or predilections. Maybe it was one of those things of he was married to his work and his properties.
Good point. And the reality is, I shouldn't say he has no legacy, because here we are literally talking about him. So clearly he has enough legacy, and maybe that's all it was. Maybe that's what he wanted in his life, was to do things, and he was just a humble, hardworking man that managed to benefit himself personally, but didn't feel the need to the company of other people, or who knows? But what an interesting person and an incredible town. And places like Cunnamulla, I've not been there myself, but I know a number of people that have, and I know there was some flooding, I think, at the end of last year out there. And it is one of these places I would love to go after a flood to see it just green and like a magnificent rebirth that the outback goes through after a big flood event or big rains, which can be so few and far between. And then also go back in a dry period just to see the contrast, which is such a beautiful part, I think, of the Australian landscape. Harsh.
I love it. Yeah.
But beautiful in its own way as well, which, that's why our national colours are green and gold, because it's that dichotomy of boom and bust that we seem to have in this incredible country. So what a special place. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. No worries.
All right, let us move on to segment 2, the budget again. Budget 2, Electric Boogaloo. Simply put, the Treasurer Jim Chalmers said that the core of this budget is an economic strategy with 5 main parts. They are getting through the global oil shock and rebuilding resilience, taking the pressure off of people where they can, making the economy more productive to lift living standards over time, reforming the tax system for workers, businesses, and future generations, including new tax cuts for every Australian taxpayer. They had to say that right there, didn't they? And finally, making the budget stronger, more sustainable, and helping take the pressure off inflation by saving more than we spend. We're dealing with the 5th economic shock in less than 20 years. I've said this more times than I can remember now. If I had a nickel for every time. I am beginning to get sick of living through once-in-a-lifetime events.
Yep. This is the 5th 100-year flood this century.
That's right. Everyday Australians are feeling the pinch, of course. We've already gone into depth with the 2 big changes proposed by this budget, but there are a bunch of smaller items that are possibly just as impactful, or at least individually impactful to each and every one of us. The big one is tax cuts. How exciting. As we've already discussed, this budget will raise in taxes on investment properties, some trust funds, and giving the revenue back to workers with a $250 tax break. Under reforms, it will rebalance. Excuse me, I burped right as I went to say that, but perhaps a little Freudian slip there. Will rebalance the Australian tax system. Mr. Chalmers described Labor's 5th budget, this Labor government's 5th budget, I should say, as the most important and ambitious in decades, saying that it made the tax system fairer, stronger for workers, businesses, first-time buyers, and future generations. A plan to rein in the ballooning NDIS is the biggest single source of savings in the budget, which is expected to remain in the red over the next 4 years. We discussed this at length about, I think it was 2 episodes ago. So if you want to hear more about the NDIS changes, that was released before the budget, so we knew exactly basically what was going on there. Of course, war in the Middle East is forecast to have a significant impact on Australia's economy in the short term, with inflation peaking at 5% in a scenario with oil prices starting to ease by July. Hopefully, old Donny J can pull his finger out and sort this out.
Let's hope so. God's sake.
Workers are to receive extra income tax breaks, with the budget including a $250 working Australian tax offset, or WATO, that will be paid annually to taxpayers from mid-2028. I can't stress this enough. A lot of these budget stuff sounds really great, and you're like, yeah, tax reform, but then it doesn't occur for a while. The Working Australians tax offset, which Mr. Chalmers said is the biggest cost of living measure in this budget, will cost $6.4 billion in the first 2 years. So I think this is important to remember when we say, you go, $250, isn't a lot of money. But yeah, $250 individually adds up pretty significantly to the budget. Initially, the income offset will and separate tax relief for businesses effectively neutralize the extra budget revenue generated by the capital gains tax and negative gearing and trust changes, which are forecast to raise $8.1 billion over 4 years. But over time, the government will earn more from those reforms than it spends on tax cuts, with the total package improving the budget deficit by an estimated $77 billion over the next 10 years. Ouch. But there's more. From 2026-2027, a new instant tax deduction of up to $1,000 will simplify work-related expense deductions. The reform will allow workers to knock $1,000 off their taxable income without providing receipts. This will help workers to cut back on paperwork and save time and money at tax time, and quite frankly will make the ATO's job a little bit easier. The deduction will deliver 6.2 million workers, which is 42% of taxpayers, an average tax saving of $250 in your pocket. $205 in your pocket. Taxpayers claiming more than $1,000 in tax-related deductions will still be able to do so in the usual way. You just got to bring those receipts. And we must remember that the tax cuts already in the budget from previous years. From July 1st, 2026, the 16% tax rate, which applies to taxable income between $18,201 and $45,000, will be reduced to 15%. This is literally money back in your pocket. From July 1st, 2027, that rate will drop again to 14%. That means if you're earning the average income of $79,000, you will see an additional tax cut of $268 in the 2026-2027 financial year and $536 in the year compared to 2027-2028. So that is literally money back in your pocket, which is awesome. And the total tax cut from 2027-2028 onward would be $2,190 a year. Don't go spend it all on lunch, because that's probably the cost of a loaf of bread in 2028. No, that's a joke, obviously. Enjoy your tax cuts. All right. Defense is getting a boost with an increasing global uncertainty and unpredictability. The US president in power, the government is significantly boosting Australia's defence spending. An additional $53 billion will be spent on defence over the next decade, including $14 billion lift in spending in the next 4 years. Much of the new spending is going to be tied to major projects like AUKUS, the nuclear-powered submarine program, which is much broader than just that, but that's the big ticket item. But they will also be spending on long-range strike missiles, drones, counter-drone technology. A lot of this we went into detail on defense spending in our episode on the 22nd of April, so I think about three weeks ago. So if you want to know more about that, jump over there. Fuel security has been secured, with more than $10 billion being spent on strengthening Australia's fuel security to ease supply constraints caused by the Iran war. The government will increase the minimum stock holding obligation for every type of fuel by about 10 days. This will ensure at least 50 days supply of jet fuel and diesel and 37 days worth of petrol. To help refiners and importers meet these new obligations, the government is spending $7.5 billion on loans and equity to allow companies to purchase the extra stock. The government will also spend $3.2 billion on establishing a government-owned fuel reserve. Golf clap, fantastic news, which will hold 1 billion litres of emergency diesel and jet fuel. Of course, this is going to take time to build, but I think this is a major step in the right direction. Of course, I just need to say a little PSA here. Just be aware, in March, the Prime Minister offered a temporary lifeline by halving the fuel excise, which saves about 23 cents a litre off the cost of petrol, and removing the heavy vehicle road users charge for 3 months. That relief is going to come to an end, of course, with those discounts disappearing at the start of July. So fuel price is going to go up in the next sort of 30 days. I should say, what's that, like 45 days, thereabouts. And this year's budget offers no new help for drivers facing those fuel price increases at this time. Let's not pretend that the government may when this deadline comes up, they may go, you know what, we're going to extend it or something like that. So don't freak out, but there may be pain in the short term with fuel costs. Health usually gets one of the largest slices of the budget pie, of course, and this year it is no different. Health accounts for more than 16% of total expenses in 2026-2027. A record extra $25 billion is going towards public hospitals under a new 5-year funding deal with conjunction with the state governments as well. There's also $1.8 billion over 5 years to keep walk-in urgent care clinics up and running long term. We've spoken about these urgent care clinics a couple of times, and I think that's great that they're actually, investing in the long-term sustainability of these clinics. The government will also once again increase the Medicare levy low income threshold. So about 1 million Australians on lower incomes will continue to be exempt from the Medicare levy or pay at a reduced rate to see their GP. The federal government is also investing $5.9 billion to deliver life-saving medicines to Australians through new listings on the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. This includes treatments for cystic fibrosis, chronic kidney disease, various cancers, and a whole lot more. We love the PBS, and we love that the government continues to invest in that as well. A key focus for Labor is boosting productivity. Maybe they shouldn't have cut the capital gains tax benefits for investing in businesses, but anyway, which has hit a whopping 60-year low in the last decade. Oh, no surprise, everyone's spending money on houses. To put Australia back on the right path, Labor is slashing the cost for businesses complying with the government regulations by $10 billion a year, which is a shocking amount of red tape. The government will also expand venture capital tax incentives to help startups and growing firms to get their new businesses off the ground. The government's productivity package includes overhauling a test used to select skilled migrants and a commitment to speed up the process for migrants seeking to have their overseas qualifications recognised in Australia, which is good all round. This goes, look, we could go into way more detail on any of these, but particularly this one. As always, all the information is in the show notes. If you want to read the budget papers specifically, you can find them there. The government is saving money by stripping funding from a program aimed at accelerating Australia's green hydrogen industry. Of course, they're doing cuts on a whole bunch of stuff, but this one particularly stood out for me and made me a little bit sad. The government is pulling hundreds of millions out of Hydrogen Head Start, which offers tax credits from projects producing hydrogen from renewable energy sources, because the program is not being adopted as anticipated. I'm very sad to see this. Unallocated funding in the Solar, Sunshot and Battery Breakthrough Initiative programs will also be withdrawn, saving $1.3 billion across the 3 renewable programs over the next decade. There are also savings from uncommitted funding in other grant schemes, including the Powering the Regions Fund and the National Water Grid Fund as well. And finally, in no surprise to me, the government has axed funding for the Melbourne to Brisbane Inland Rail project after projections showed that it would cost upwards of $45 billion to complete. We're never going to get that damn fast train from Melbourne to Brisbane, are we? We can't even upgrade the rail infrastructure that we have. This isn't surprising to me. It is disappointing, but it's not surprising. Of course, this is kind of a lightning round. This is not even close to all of the changes. So as I said a minute ago, feel free to jump into the show notes, explore the links. We've included some really good ABC News links. The ABC does a fantastic job every year at really breaking down.
They're good on the budget, aren't they?
They're absolutely fantastic with the budget. And they just lay it out in a factual way. It makes it very easy to sort of pop through. So jump into the show notes. They've got all the links there. Of course, I have also included the entire budget document. I briefly started reading through it. I did fall asleep about 6 times. But if you love it and you want to go through it line by line, it is thrilling, particularly with your eyes closed. But Ardeet, was there anything that stood out to you other than, of course, the 2 big ticket items we spoke about before? Was there anything that was a major surprise, or is this kind of as far as budgets go, much of the muchness,
Oh,
more
no, I
business
don't
as
know
usual.
that necessarily say it's much of a muchness. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of that in something, in something as big as a federal budget for a nation state. There's going to be, a lot of standard items and repeated things. I suppose there are a couple of things that did stand out to me. It really irritates me, this narrative that's in there of sort of like, well, things were going really well until this bloody schmozzle over in Iran started. We had problems with inflation before even the first attack on Iran. There was issues there. There were problems that had to get addressed. And sure enough, as I think you and I might have even, I can't remember whether we discussed it on the podcast or just talking in our catch up before it started. But there was. There was the thing of, I bet this is going to get used as an excuse, and certainly they certainly haven't said it's 100%, but they've been leaning on it so heavily, that it's creating this narrative of, if this hadn't started, we would have had things under control. We wouldn't have had these issues, and I find that very frustrating. To me, it's an excuse for a lot of the government failings that I'm seeing highlighted in this budget, and I'm considering government failings as being where programs need to be increased, taxes need to be increased, because the money and the system hasn't been managed correctly up to that stage. I also thought, look, you made $250 in your pocket. Yeah, I'd rather have $250 in my pocket than not. But I feel like the headline and the "we're looking after the workers" that they're drawing out of that, it doesn't stack up to actually what's getting put in people's pockets. So, yep, it can mean a hell of a lot to a number of people, but at the end of the day, an extra $250 a year, I personally think that's a little bit piss weak. I did like the reduction of the lower tax brackets, a progressive reduction on that. I don't think it's going to cost a hell of a lot, but I think it can also give a lot of relief to people on lower income. So that I thought was a positive. Have to give a tick on that. In the category of great idea, but I'll believe it when I see it, is the cutting of the red tape, and they say, we're going to look at this and we estimate that we can save $10 billion a year. How much of a drain, an anchor on the economy, is $10 billion worth of red tape? And how much more can you cut of that? There's just this reluctance to let go of this grasping power and desire to stick your fingers and noses into everybody's business, which always incurs a cost and always slows things down, de-incentivizes people. So it needs to be way more than that, but credit for that, kudos on that. And I also like too that they're at least they're putting this the venture capital incentive into play there, hopefully encouraging people to, I suppose, increase the risk profile, do something more with creating new businesses. So we'll see how that goes, but I like the fact that is in there. Look, the cuts, I suppose there's different. You and I both have a soft spot for the green hydrogen. We'd like to see that. I can understand the reason for the Melbourne to Brisbane inland rail cuts back to there. But I don't know. I feel like you just need, a bit of bloody balls from one of them to get out there and say, listen, this is going to be ultimately beneficial for the country. It's going to cost us a shirtload now. It's probably not going to be profitable, but it's going to be infrastructure. It's going to be in place, can be improved for future generations, and just bite the bullet and do it. I know there's all the arguments. This comes up regularly, the fast rail and that, but there's a certain amount. If you just need someone out there that can just sit out and say, listen, it's just going to happen, and this is what it's going to cost, and we're going to have this infrastructure in place. So, look, that's probably reflecting some of my personal biases. It goes against a lot of what I've said about government spending. But on the rail, there's a whole list of things that I do and don't want government to do. But something like the rail can just have so many benefits, in my opinion. It does have the costs, but happens to be one of my biases. Defence we've discussed, but the bottom line is, I can see some. I'm probably overall supportive of the spending that they're doing, that particularly with the increase in Australians' local productions and skill sets. But as DK said, check out the episode a couple of weeks back for more details of that. Fuel security again. Okay, look, they're putting in adding the 10 days to what they've got, but it's still under the recommended, as I recall, still under the recommended 60 odd days. So it's like they're taking their failure, going halfway towards what they should do, and saying, look, isn't this incredible? Look how much we've increased it. So no particular tick on that to me. It's sort of like, well, you should be doing it. That's your job. That's your duty, and you actually need to do it. Better. Yeah, building the government reserve. Okay, fair enough. That's probably not a bad idea, but I remain unimpressed by that, and I have a very low level of confidence that it's going to pan out as it's being planned. And let's hope that what's going on with the war in Iran and Hormuz and that, let's hope that gets a quick resolution. As soon as that stops being a headline thing, that'll be a prime cut. You'll start going back to the usual actions on that, in my opinion. So yeah, not much of a pat on the back from me on that, because I'm thinking, well, you're just doing your job, but you're still not doing it well enough.
Yeah, I feel like I pretty much agree with you on that. It seems really good on paper, and they're making the right noises. But you're right. As soon as the Strait of Hormuz reopens, they'll go, we don't need it anymore, and we'll be back to where we were before, sort of thing. So the government storage is a good plan, but I think you're right. You watch in a next, there'll be a small little piece of legislation that'll cut the minimum stock holding obligations in 12 months or something like that, and we'll be back to basically where we were. Yeah,
exactly. So they were sort of the highlights for me. What any things particularly stood out for you, and what's your overall sort of wrap up on those I suppose minor compared to capital gains tax and negative gearing, but still big ticket items, particularly the health side. What's your wrap up on those?
I do think there's some. Unfortunately, I do think this budget is kind of a little bit overshadowed by the big reforms, and that's very much what's taken the lion's share of the news around this. I do think the defence spending, which we have talked about quite a bit, and I don't want to dwell on it too much, but I do think the defence boost is absolutely fantastic. I think it is a smart play with the current global uncertainty that we find ourselves in, and I know we've talked about this many times, so I'll move on. But I do think think that's a great thing. And I'm very pleased to see that they're prioritizing that, because I think that's one of these things, I mean, like we just mentioned about the fuel security situation where it's a bit sort of like too little too late. I do think defense they are taking seriously in a way that I hope we don't get caught with our pants down if something were to happen in this region. The tax reforms, like personal income tax reforms, I think are really, really good. At the same time, I feel like I would rather not have a tax cut and keep the capital gains tax the same. Would that pan out equally in my pocket? Almost certainly not. I think on an individual year, the tax offset would probably be better in my pocket than the capital gains tax. But it's about a mindset thing for a lot of people, right? It's about how does this work? You know, it's about, I feel like with people are irrational creatures, and when it comes to investing money in particular, we are quite irrational. We make a lot of short-sighted sort of decisions, and I do feel like, hey, instead of giving you a tax cut, do you want to keep your negative gearing discount? I think a lot of people would pick that, even if it's not more beneficial. But anyway, so look, it is what it is. Tax cuts are beneficial for everyone, pretty much, and I think that's a good thing. I think it's great that they, with the focusing on the cost of living stuff, they are genuinely focusing on quote unquote younger people, because they're focusing on workers and they're focusing on putting money back in your pocket from a working point of view. I feel like we've seen so many budgets in the past focusing on retirees, focusing on pensioners, focusing on people on benefits over the last sort of, I don't know, basically since 2019, there has been a really, really strong emphasis on the most vulnerable, which is fine. And I think we should prioritize them to a point. But I do think that the average Aussie, the battle is the people that actually churn the economy have kind of been left to a point, or at least they probably feel that way. And I do think this is kind of throwing them a bone a little bit, like, hey, we haven't forgotten, you're still here, we are still focusing on you. And I do think Labor, compared to, say, a coalition government, are a little bit better at that than we've seen in the past. I think the coalition would probably more focus on business stuff as opposed to workers. And so, you know, it's pretty typical of a Labor government to kind of go in this direction. But I do think it's welcome, and I think most people will be quite happy when they see their tax returns in a couple of years. We've sort of already mentioned the fuel security thing. I do think the government-owned fuel reserve is a good idea. Will this genuinely come into fruition? Question mark. I'm kind of 60-40 on whether or not this will actually happen. And I don't think it's going to be enough. I think $3.2 billion is a lot of money, but when you're talking about building a purpose-built storage facility, that money can get sucked up very, very quickly. You know, this is I know it should be simple. Like, what do you mean? They're just big storage tanks. It's not. It's not quite that simple. And so I do think $3.2 billion is probably going to give us maybe a day or two's worth of fuel storage. So broadly speaking, that's not going to be enough. But again, if we focus on it from a national security point of view, I think that's a really good thing. And I'm glad that it's in there, but it's probably not enough. Hard to justify. This is one of those things, a bit like defense spending, where it's hard to go, let's invest in something that we probably won't need until the worst things happen. And again, people are irrational. We don't focus on that sort of stuff. We focus on the business as usual kind of stuff, and the rainy day stuff. We kick the can down the road constantly. And I think this is one of those things. So better to have it and not need it, but yeah, probably not enough in the broad speaking. And I hope I never have to say, I told you so.
Yeah. Yeah.
health, I think we always see dividends on health. Whenever we invest in health, it's better for everyone. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter where you sit on the socioeconomic ladder. Investments in health, I think, are better for everyone long term. So having a huge funding boost, particularly in going into public hospitals, is absolutely fantastic. We are so bad at funding hospitals in this country, and there is a lot of waste and stuff like that. So I would love to see some internal reforms within the states, but I guess this comes not so much from the federal level to sort of cut wastage and that sort of stuff. But throwing money at a problem, I think when it comes to health, is pretty much only going to be beneficial for the country long term, but particularly the continued investment into the pharmaceutical benefit scheme is going to be massive for so many people. And this is one of these ones where I don't think you could really ever put in too much money into the PBS, and I say that because from the mindset of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And the more we fund the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, the more we fund these sort of beneficial medicines moving forward, I think it's only going to be better for Australians long term. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it's like the sickest 10% use 90% of the funding. I get that. But at the end of the day, we want more Australians to live longer, happier lives than to just die in a gutter or have an American system which is just so cruel. So for me, I would always want to see that funding. Just quickly, the productivity package and stuff like that, I think is really, really good. I do think streamlining the skilled migrant program, I know that's going to be unpopular with certain groups of people, but I do think that's a good idea. Let's streamline particularly certain skilled migrant applications, because we do unnecessarily make it difficult for certain groups of skilled migrants to come in, and we so desperately need people, and they want to come. So let's streamline that process to get the right people here with the right skills to actually do the right jobs. I basically mirror your opinion on the government regulations. It's just boggles the mind how we're suddenly able to cut so much red tape in that respect. So I think that's great. I also think it's great that we're investing in venture capital, tax incentives, and helping startups get off the ground. This has been a big kind of axe that I've had to grind over the last few years, and I've probably not been as vocal on the podcast as I have been in my private life about this, where we don't invest in new businesses as much as we probably should. And I think the government does have a role there to kind of help support these. Think of it like this. You don't plant a tree in the ground, my new avocado tree. I need to put a stake to hold it up. It needs to a little bit of help while it's growing and it's young. And I feel the same way about a lot of small businesses. We need to help them where they're small, let them grow so they can flourish, and we can sit in the shade of them as we grow old. And I think there's the same thing with a lot of small businesses, particularly venture capitals, because there's quite often there's a bit of risk there, and we may need some years before this is fully going to pay off. And I don't think we should be silly with it, but I do think we should help them, and I think it's good that we're heading in that direction. Unfortunately, I'm very upset about the green hydrogen industry not getting fully behind this. I know we were both sort of bullish, and you mentioned this, but this is one of these ones that I freaking knew. I feel like I called it, that this was going to happen. Where now that they've pulled funding, everyone's going to go, oh, see, they pulled the funding. We didn't want to do it because we knew this was going to happen. And I'm like, yeah, damn it. Like, it's so frustrating, because I still strongly believe that this is such a great idea long term, that this would really, really have benefited Australia. And it's upsetting to see this, but they've laid the seeds. Maybe this industry will continue to develop, and maybe they don't need the government incentives. I don't know. Watch this space. I really, really hope something continues in this field. And finally, the inland rail. No surprises there. I mean, I said it at the beginning. This does not surprise me. And again, I mirror your thoughts with, it's very frustrating that this is one of those programs. Infrastructure, core rail infrastructure upgrades are one of these things, a bit like highways, where when you build it, they will come. You cannot it's very difficult to justify spending $45 billion. I get it. Like, truly, it's a lot of money. But at the same time, this is one of these ones where I feel like the investment once it's there, the benefits are going to outweigh the costs. We saw this in other countries as well, where my first thoughts go to the bullet train in Japan. People ridiculed, I think the head of the program initially, just as it was finished, he steps down in disgrace. He was shamed because how can you spend this amount of money? It's ridiculous, blah, 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 blah. Japan's economy wouldn't be what it is today without that train. And I feel like Australia, could it be the same? We're not going to know until hindsight's going to prove us right or wrong, but it is frustrating that we're continuing to have the same conversation for the last, 40 years? Yeah. Build the train and we'll benefit. We can't afford it. We don't want to build it. I'm not surprised, but it is incredibly frustrating. So,
yeah, bloody oath.
If any of you disagree, agree, are upset by our takes on this, please get in touch with us at Australia Talks at proton.me. I could talk about the budget for much, 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 much longer, but this episode is already getting long enough. Let's move on. It's time for This Week in Australian History.
This week in Australian history, covering 8th to the 14th of May. May 8th in 1809, Lachlan Macquarie is appointed to replace William Bligh as Governor of New South Wales. He was appointed after the Rum Rebellion and became known by many as the Father of Australia because he had a whole lot of progressive policies. Infrastructure building, hint, hint, Albo, who listens to the podcast.
He would have built trains.
He would have. Exactly right. 1948, Margaret McIntyre was the first female member of the Parliament of Tasmania and assumed the seat of Cornwall in Legislative Council. 1970, an estimated 100,000 people participated in protests against Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War. 1972, Darren Hayes, the frontman of pop duo Savage Garden, is born in Brisbane. I'm not quite sure why I did include that. I don't usually include the ball ones. I didn't have any extra notes. Anyway,
because you're a huge Savage Garden fan. That's all right.
I'm ashamed to say I don't know much Savage Garden music at all. They were the one who the bridge was it Savage Garden? The bridge was named after in one of their songs in Brisbane.
I have no idea if a bridge was named after them. I can't say. Yeah,
I remember it popping up before in history. Anyway, so obviously slipped that part. Everything slipped there. Anyway, May 9th, 1900, the Sierra Nevadas wrecked off Portsea in Victoria with 23 lives being lost. 1901, the first Parliament of Australia is opened in the Royal Exhibition Building, and then in 1927, the federal government moved to Canberra from Melbourne with the opening of the Provisional Parliament House, and that symbolised the completion of the Federation vision. 1985, Melbourne criminal Christopher Dale Flannery disappears without trace, presumed murdered. Now, he was known as Mr. Rent-A-Kill. He was a notorious hitman in part of the Melbourne's underworld wars of the 1980s. I can't imagine that something good happened.
No, yeah.
It's a whole lifestyle that I'm glad I have nothing to do with. 1988, they opened the new Parliament House. Lizzie opened that, Queen Elizabeth II. 1991, Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody was released, and it examined the high rate of Indigenous deaths in custody, made 339 recommendations for reform. And it's even today still a landmark report on the justice issues around Indigenous people. May 10th, 1824, Supreme Court in Tasmania opened. 1996, Prime Minister John Howard announces gun controls in the wake of the Port Arthur massacre. Gun controls, gun thefts, whichever way you want to look at it. May 11th, 1982, the High Court upholds the Racial Discrimination Act in 1975 in Kuwata versus Bjorky Peterson. So it was the decision affirmed the validity of the Federal Racial Discrimination Act, and it was a way to limit Queensland's ability to block Indigenous land rights. 1989. And actually, look, this surprised me so much that I had to double check it. I'll just read it, and you tell me if there's something that sticks out to you. 1989, Rosemary Follett became the first Chief Minister of the Australian Capital Territory and the first female leader to lead a state or territory government.
I cannot believe that was in 1989.
There it is.
That's shocking. Also,
Yep.
Cop that, Victoria. Wasn't Victoria, was it?
Now, I think it might be a little bit of a depth, but I said, no. I thought that has to be wrong. But no, first female leader to lead a state or territory government. So it's not saying the first woman in Parliament or things like that, but the first one actually be in that leadership position. I wouldn't have even come close to 1989 if I'd guessed that.
Yeah, if you asked me that in a trivia question,
Yep.
I would have probably got the century wrong, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have got the century wrong, but I tell you what, I wouldn't have been far into the 1900s. So yeah, that was an interesting one.
Shocking.
Yeah. May 12th in 1865, bushranger John Gilbert shot dead near Bidalong in New South Wales. He was a member of Ben Hall's gang. 1997, Susie Moroney became the first person to swim the Florida Straits from Cuba to the United States. So that was a 180k swim, which is a ridiculously good effort. May 13th. 1787, the First Fleet leaves Portsmouth, England, for New South Wales with the intention of establishing the first European settlement in Australia. 1861, John Tebbutt of Windsor, New South Wales, discovers what would become known as the Great Comet of 1861. So he was an amateur astronomer. I'm pretty sure I had Tebbutt in one of the Two Ticks Town Talks.
I think you did, yeah. Yep.
I'll see if I remember to put that in. If I don't, just look up. Don't know.
Windsor, New South Wales.
Oh, good on you, DK. Windsor. Just let me note that down now. Windsor. Thank you very much. So yeah, if I don't get it in there, just look up Windsor. Yeah, he was an interesting bloke. Loved his astronomy. 1932, Sir Philip Game, the Governor of New South Wales, dismisses the Labor Party government of Jack Lang, who had refused to pay interest on overseas loans. In 2012, there's a resident of Old South Head Road in Sydney, Don Ritchie, who successfully intervened in at least 160 suicide attempts at the Gap. He passed away aged 86. He was known as the Angel of the Gap, and he basically he was there, would see people contemplating it and really just went over and sort of was there for them. G'day, would take them into his home, sit down, have a chat. As I understood it, he wasn't necessarily trying to talk them out. He was just there for someone, bit of human contact in that time of need. And 160 successful interventions. I mean, that's, not many people can say that. May 14th, 1798, HMS Nautilus arrives in Sydney carrying missions from the London Missionary Society, first group of Protestant missionaries to the colony. 1859, the Melbourne Football Club, Australia's oldest footy club, that's AFL, Australian Aussie Rules, Australian Football League, is founded. And finally, 1984, on May the 14th, the $1 coin is introduced in Australia and replaced the $1 note and features the kangaroo design still used today. And as part of the broader currency modernisation, I liked the $1 note. It was a good-looking note. It was fun to have. I can sort of understand the reasoning for changing it. But it was a good-looking bit of currency and brown, just like a good beer.
All right, that sound means it's time for the Forex Bottle Top question. I, too, wish that the $1 note was still around. I know... I have a love-hate relationship with it. I think it was a great thing. I love going to America with their $1 notes, and or even rarely if you get a $2 note. It makes me feel like I've got a lot more money than I do.
Yeah.
This wad of $1 notes, which I understand can be frustrating, but it's also fun, you know.
Yeah.
All right, this week we have 3 questions. They are all about kind of budgets. They're financial related, let's call it that way.
Okay.
So, first question. When did GST become a thing? It was in a landmark budget.
Oh, yeah. That's with bloody little Johnny Howard.
Johnny Howard's been called many things. Little isn't often one of them.
Yeah. Well, look, I couldn't. I was thinking, is there a way that I can bleep out using the C word? But anyway, this is often preceded by "he's a little." I think it was. Was it proposed then? God, I'm torn between 94 or 98. 97, 98. I'm going to say 1998.
So, the answer I'm looking for is when did GST not the budget that it was in, the actual when it kicked in. Does that make sense? Are you happy with that? You're happy with that?
I thought, okay. I was combining the two in my head. I didn't realise there was such a gap between them. But yes, I'll stick with 98.
Okay. So the Howard government introduced the Goods and Services Tax, which commenced in the 1st of July 2000. So it was announced in the 1999 budget. The June 28th of June 1999, a new tax system, Goods and Services Act, Commonwealth 1999, is what gained assent in July 1999 and came into operation on the 1st of July 2000. And I'm sure you do remember when it came into effect. I remember going to a fish and chip shop and they had all the prices and then they crossed them all out on the chalkboard and wrote new prices next to it. So it had pre-GST and then post-GST written on. And I was just like, just change the price. It was a bit of a shambles at the time, but
I thought it was. I obviously didn't remember the right date. Otherwise, I would have guessed it. But I knew it was around about then. So, yeah. But I do remember that pre-GST. Yeah. So, way to see in the new century with more tax.
Certainly. All right. Question 2. This is a bit of a strange one, but can parliamentarians drink alcohol during the budget?
I'm going to ask for a qualifier on that. can parliamentarians literally sit there in the chamber
Yes,
drinking alcohol? Is
yes.
that the question?
Yes, that is the
So
question.
not be over the limit, because they don't get breathalyzers at all. They can be half tanked if they want.
Yep.
Oh, that's an interesting question to ask, and the fact that you're asking it implies that there is a rule in there from way back that probably hasn't been rescinded, but yet for optics is not actually acted upon. So the fact that you've asked it means I'm going to say yes, and I bet it's an old rule.
So, yeah, you're sort of, I like the way you're thinking. So the answer is actually no, there's not. But in the UK, there is a long-standing tradition that the Chancellor of the Exchequer can drink alcohol whilst delivering the budget speech. And this goes back a long, long
Really?
way. Yes. Today, though, it is pretty rare, and I don't think it's been done very much in the last century, basically. But Winston Churchill did. He was at one point the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he did have a scotch, I believe, when he delivered the budget speech.
Well, Churchill was drinking.
A surprise, I know. Famously sober.
The words never heard together. Famous teetotaler Winston Churchill.
That's right. If you want a challenge, try and drink the equivalent amount of alcohol that Winston Churchill did in a day. Just in a day. I guarantee you probably won't be able to do it. And if you want an extra difficult, smoke as many cigars as he did as well, and you'll die in a day. But coming back to the question, unfortunately, Australia, we are too prudish and we never allowed such an official privilege. However, I suggest we bring that back. I think it would be a bit of fun for the Treasurer to stand there with a drink, just one, whilst they announce the budget. It would make the flair of the night a little bit bigger.
Yeah, or every time he introduces a new tax or cost to the Australian people, he has to scull a shot of Bundy rum. So by the end, we might actually end up hearing some truth out of them.
I like that idea, actually. Every time he says Mr. Speaker, he gets to have a sip.
Yeah.
All right, last question. Which is larger out of these three? Or I guess I want you to put these three in order. So which is larger in terms of value in Australian dollars? Australia's housing market, Australia's GDP, or Apple Incorporated, like the technology company, total value, which is
total value
bigger?
Oh, total value.
Australia's housing market, Apple Incorporated, Apple Inc., their total value, or Australia's GDP?
That is an interesting question. And just to clarify, when you're saying the housing market, what it's estimated to be worth in terms of X number of properties valued at X price?
Yes. So market value today, obviously, if you try to sell every property in Australia, it would take pretty quickly. But the market value of Australian property today is worth how much?
Gosh. Apple's a big company, but that's why I was asking for clarify. Okay, I reckon the Australian property market with those parameters is definitely going to be bigger than Apple, and we're talking about Apple's what do you call it? The share market worth. What's the
the market cap?
Market capital. Yeah. We're talking about that value compared to the actual Australian GDP. So I'm going to say the Australian housing market, followed by Apple, followed by the Aussie GDP.
Ah, ding, ding, ding. You are 100% correct. So I'll give you the numbers.
Yes, please do.
And I'll put them in reverse order. So Australia's GDP is the lowest, not slowest. But again, I think we need to just qualify this as this is a yearly amount as opposed to a total value.
Yeah, sure.
So Australia's GDP currently sits at about approximately $2.8 trillion. Apple's total market value is $5.9 trillion. But Australia's housing market, do you want to have a guess how much it is?
Oh gosh. I don't know whether it's not going to be up in. It's not going to be three figures before the trillion, but it's going to be a wild amount. I don't think it'd be over. What are we going to say? It's because a trillion is just a massive amount of money.
It's a silly amount of money.
It is a silly amount of money. Much as I think it might be higher, given how much a trillion is worth, I'm saying somewhere between 24 and 36. I'm going to say 32.
32, a little bit too high. It's $12 trillion.
Right.
But of course, after these after this budget, it's probably more like 3 trillion. No, no.
That is a lot of money. It's
a ridiculous amount of money. So to put a trillion in perspective for our listeners that don't fully understand, if I were to say to you 1,000,000 seconds, how long would that be? It's about 11.5 days, just for scale. 1 billion is 31.7 years. So just to show you how big the difference is. A trillion, do you want to have a guess how many a trillion seconds is in years?
Oh, I do know it because I've done this exact calculation before and was blown away. So you can do the reveal.
It is 31,710 years. So $1 trillion, if you had to think you had to spend $1 a second, is a ridiculously massive number. I know it kind of rolls off the tongue and we kind of go, oh, it's just $1 trillion. No, $1 trillion is a silly big number. So there you go. Australia's housing market currently today is worth approximately $12 trillion or about 2 apples. I'm not sure if that is better or worse, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But on that bombshell, thank you so much for listening to another Australia Talks. If you have any feedback or suggestions for topics, please get in touch with us on our email at australiatalks@proton.me. We'd also be grateful if you could subscribe and give us an honest review, as this helps us out immensely. But the best thing you can do to help us out is share it with a friend that you think might like it. Otherwise, join us next week for another episode of Australia Talks. Thanks for listening, and as always, don't forget, tell your mum I love her.
Thank you, DK, and tonight I'll be dreaming of big avocados.